Hi, my name is Eric Tridas. I am a developmental and behavioral pediatrician from Tampa, and I have had a very strong interest in learning and behavior problems uh, ever since I was in medical school. I finished my training at the Children's Hospital in Boston and then moved to Florida, and I have been working in the field of learning disabilities ever since. What I will be talking about during the conference this year is the diagnosis and management of the child with reading problems. And the things that I really like to emphasize is that we focus so much on the diagnosis. And what we try to look for is the symptoms. What are the symptoms that are causing impairment? We measure impairment in three main areas: work, social emotional, and health. So if the child is not doing badly in school, if the child is not driving his or her parents crazy, or the teachers, if they have at least one friend and they're not sick, things are not bad. Anything above that is wonderful. Anything below that, then we need to look at what the cause of the problem is. And in the evaluation process, what we try to do is to look at what are the factors that contribute to the clinical presentation, to what we're seeing. And we look at four things. We look at the child's developmental profile, or the pattern of strengths and weaknesses, the behavior profile, health factors, and the environment. When I look at the environment, the first thing that I try to ascertain is where are they in school? Because when you look at the child in school, there are three main goals that any school anywhere in the world has. The first one is to teach the children how to read, how to write, how to add, subtract, and multiply. The second goal is to provide them with general education. And the final goal is to prepare them for higher education. So if I have a child, for example, that presents with a reading or a writing or a math problem, and the child is somewhere between the kindergarten and the third grade, we can really put the emphasis on remediation, in strengthening those weaknesses. Because between the fourth and the eighth grade, that's when we focus on general education. We no longer teach reading, writing, or basic arithmetic. We are applying those skills. So the time to learn to read is kindergarten through the third grade. The time to learn to write is kindergarten through the third grade. And the time to learn to add, subtract, and multiply is the same. From fourth grade on, we read to learn, we write to communicate, and we apply our math skills. And at that point, we also need to be working independently. We need to know what's due, when, we need to plan our projects, we need to manage our time. So time management and organization, study habits, those are the things that we refer to also as executive functions begin to play a major role. And if you think about it, when the students get into middle school, they will have to adapt to 6 different teachers, keep track of what's in their locker, and be immersed in one of the most difficult times in their lives socially, because for the first time, they're trying to ascertain where they belong in a peer group. If by the end of middle school those skills are not well developed, high school is going to be almost impossible. That's why it's so critical that we focus on early identification. Because if we identify them prior to the third grade, we can put the emphasis on really bridging the gap between the students that have learning problems and those who do not. So if your child is reading at this level and his or her peers are reading here, if I want to bring that level of performance to the typical level, I will need to remediate. And that's where the special education comes into play. We also need to look at the other factors that are commonly associated with learning problems, because very, very seldom do we have a child that just has a reading problem or a writing problem or a math problem. They may have attention difficulties, they may have anxiety, and just being in an environment that you're not necessarily wired for, where you're struggling to perform on a day-to-day basis, is a very, very stressful situation. And stress is anxiety. And if you're anxious, you're not going to think straight. And that's going to affect your capacity to work efficiently and effectively. It will affect your capacity to think straight. and to problem solve effectively. If you have problems with attention, your mind may wander. You may daydream, zone out during classes. During lectures, you make careless mistakes. A child with attention problems tend to get less work done than other kids in the same amount of time. They tend to make careless mistakes because they're not paying attention to the right thing at the right time for as long as they need to, as in depth as they need to. So when I talk about the evaluation process, what I try to do is find out what is it that the workplace is expecting the student to do. Does the student have the necessary developmental skills to meet the expectations of the workplace? What is their behavior profile? Do they tend to keep things in, act them out? Do they have symptoms that are not typical? Are there any health factors that are contributing to the clinical presentation? What is happening at home? And depending on their age, what's happening with the peer group? If I get a good description of what's happening there, all of those factors, then I can formulate a plan or a good prescription to manage it. And the management we've emphasized in 4 areas: educational management, psychological management, medical management, and environmental management. Psychological management has 2 components: remediation and accommodations. Before I talked about remediation, working with the child that is reading below grade level, and how we need to strengthen those weaknesses. So remediation really focuses on the weaknesses. Where are the problems? And that requires special education. We need to look at methodologies of reading instruction that are going to be very explicit, systematic, sequential, multisensory, that will start with the simple skills and build upon them until the student has developed fluency or automaticity. They should be able to read rapidly, accurately, and that will lead to good comprehension. We do the same thing with writing, from starting to work on how to form the letters, to the spelling, to the grammar, and be able to put on paper complete thoughts. Psychological therapy has 2 main components: the parent and the student. The behavior therapy is the focus on the parent. Behavior modification is basically the adults changing how they deal with the child so that the child changes the way that he or she responds to the adult. We can also work on helping the child change the way that they think about how they feel. We call that cognitive therapy, but they have to be a little bit older for that. So for the most part, parents and teachers guide the process of the behavior therapy, which is a training where the child learns the skills. Medication can be of help at times, and environmental accommodations. And environmental accommodations can be as simple as to where the child sits in the classroom, how you give instructions, what the schedule will be like through the day, to changing schools or other things like that. When we talk about accommodations as opposed to remediation, we talk about focusing on the strengths that the student has. And for example, if I have a student who's in middle school or high school who still have skill deficits in reading, writing, or arithmetic, that's where we look at assistive technology there. So now with tablets and iPads and computers available everywhere, we can use technology such as voice-to-print technology, so they can dictate and it will write for them. Or we can look at recorded books or print-to-voice technology, so they can scan something and it will read it to them. So the idea here is to focus on managing the areas that are weak and strengthening them, to use the strengths to overcome the weaknesses, to accommodate, to address the behavior issues, if there's some, to, if necessary, use medication to address some of the components that are affecting the performance, and to adapt the environment. And if that works, then what we see is that the child's ability to perform in the workplace will improve, that their behavior, emotional and social interaction will improve, and that will lead to a healthier lifestyle. So if I'm talking to parents and teachers, what I try to tell them is, focus on the little ones. We only have one chance to teach skills early on, kindergarten through the third grade. The child that in kindergarten is having trouble recognizing the letters of the alphabet or learning the sounds of the letters, the child that cannot rhyme, the child that has a family history of others with learning problems, that's a child that is at risk for reading difficulties, for dyslexia. And if you can't read, you're not going to be able to spell. And if you can't spell, you're going to be in trouble. We need to look at starting early to give them those skills, so by the time they get to the fourth grade, they will have developed automatic skills, and by then they can perform those tasks rapidly, accurately, and leading to a good performance. So early identification, find the right professionals, and make sure that the teachers have the proper training to provide the remediation that the children need.